Thank you, everyone, for joining us. We're going to get started. I'm really excited to be with you all today about what's a great panel about the future of blockchain, cryptocurrency, and all these things. Blockchain today seems to be everywhere. Bitcoin trading, cryptocurrency. Now, in the past, when we read and heard about the blockchain, cryptocurrency was often very controversial. When it first emerged, we might have heard things about the New Silk Road, that it might be the currency of the dark web and criminal activity. But since then, blockchain has really evolved in some interesting and very important ways. We have some serious and very successful companies like Coinbase, which is a Bitcoin trading wallet, companies like Earn.com, which Lily is the chief financial officer of, which we'll hear about later. And then companies like Fidelity is a very large Bitcoin miner. So in a sense, blockchain and cryptocurrency has gone mainstream. Some individuals, like Mark Andreessen from our venture capital firm, likens this technology either to the dawn of the personal computer or even the dawn of the internet. It's a technology that we're only beginning to grasp the scope of what it can do and all the many policy and other uses that we have. So one of the areas that I'm most excited about today, which is why we have this panel, is an area that really has received far less attention as far as blockchain. And the issue is, what can the blockchain do for social good and for the types of things that we're all thinking about today at this conference? What can it do for Californians? What can it do for voters? What can it do for citizens who are looking for better services from those who are trying to give it to them? The technology of the blockchain, or the distributed ledger, really creates enormous opportunities, either for transparency, for accountability, for lowering costs. So much so that if you look around the world, there are some countries, like Slovenia, that have claimed they're going to be the blockchain nation. Other countries have made the blockchain as part of their future economic growth strategy on what they're trying to do. And so that takes us to what we're doing today. We have a great panel across entrepreneurs, senior policymakers, senior elected officials, and thinkers about this. What I'm going to do is introduce each of our panelists as we launch right into our questions. And then along our conversation, I'll open up to all of you for questions that you may have about what the blockchain is, what sources we can use, and how we can begin a collective conversation about what this technology can do for some pretty exciting purposes. So to start us off, we have Brian Ford. Brian worked at the White House on technology in senior roles, then ran cryptocurrency at MIT Media Labs. He is writing a book about the blockchain and is one of the, I think, most interesting thinkers in the policy world about the intersection of this technology and policy. So Brian, to start us off, for a policymaker audience or maybe a non-expert audience, can you tell us what is blockchain and why does it matter to understand for a lay audience?
Sure. I just want to take the temperature in the room. How many of you own a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin, Ethereum?
Pretty
a good amount. Wow. So I don't even know if we need to answer this question.
There's the other half who didn't, so.
Yeah. Well, it just became a test, which is great. I graduated from UCLA in 2002, so it's good to be back on campus. Go Bruins. So a blockchain is simply a ledger of debits and credits. We all know what a ledger is, and we sometimes get confused with these words that we're trying to put together, but it's just a ledger of debits and credits, but with a twist. And that twist is that no one person, company, or organization owns it if it's a public blockchain. And so one of the first problems that I see happening in so many conversations amongst people who are talking about blockchain is that they don't say, wait, are you talking about a public blockchain or a private blockchain? Fundamental differences. And the easiest way to understand that is that a public blockchain, it's like Bitcoin or Ethereum, is like the internet. It's open, it's interoperable, it's decentralized, no one person, company, or organization owns it. A private blockchain is like an intranet that one company or several companies could own and control. And so oftentimes when people are talking, we could blockchain this or blockchain that, they're actually just talking right past each other. So I'd encourage you, the first question you ask when you're having this conversation is clarify. This is a public or private blockchain. Now, why does this matter? Because we've had ledgers before, digital ledgers. What makes this so important? Well, when we got to this digital world, what was wonderful about it is that if I was to take a photo of this audience right now, I could then post it on Instagram, I could email it to all of you, I could replicate it continually. And there'd be near zero cost to continually replicating that file, which is great. But when you have digital assets, things that can't be copied or shouldn't be copied because they would lose value, like a digital dollar, for example, then you get into trouble because if you can just replicate it, then it loses its value. And so what we did with public blockchains is then for the first time, you can transfer an asset with no one person, company, or organization owning the ledger, and you can be sure that that asset wasn't copied. And so a very simple example that I give to a lot of people, because most people have experienced that. Has anyone bought or received an electronic ticket to a concert or a sporting event? Yeah, right? Everyone has. And everyone, come on, like everyone's experienced this, but I think a similar experience that everyone has also felt walking up is you have some butterflies in your stomach when you're about to scan it. When I received this from a friend or when I bought this from StubHub or somewhere else, was this the only copy that was made? Because maybe it was just a PDF that you printed out. And that's what a public blockchain and hopefully some private blockchains can help prevent is the replication of that digital file so that you don't have those butterflies in your stomach when you're transferring the ownership of a digital asset from one person to another, be it a concert ticket, be it the ownership or the title of a car, or be it money.
So that's great. So Brian, you mentioned a few things. I mean, it's a distributed ledger that anyone can add to, we can't subtract to. Like the database, there are some public elements that we think about. One part is in terms of Bitcoin that more people here own than we thought, an actual currency, and then the platform for technology to do a number of other things, to create some type of scarcity, but also trust in digital assets on the internet.
Can I add something, Matt, just to
Please,
that, to
Bob.
kind of dumb it down?
Senator Robert Hertzberg is the former Speaker of the California State Legislature. He's a state senator now representing Los Angeles and San Fernando Valley. Let's think about these issues. Bob.
Yeah, the thing that I like to say in terms of a block, the component of a blockchain, it's pretty simple. One, it has a reference number. Two, it's time stamped as to when it was actually made. And three, it's linked back to the previous block. So hence, if you think about the idea of its security and its bit of information, and any changes at all in the system, I think, Brian, you can't do. So the idea behind it is that it creates something that's unique and something that's secure. I think we were talking before about the power it takes to hack the blockchain Lily, how much is that? What were you saying?
The Bitcoin blockchain.
Right, the Bitcoin blockchain. So
Bitcoin.
Google, if you took all of Google's compute power and had it do nothing but hash Bitcoin, it would have about 0.1% of the network.
And the important thing to know there is that if you have more than 51% of this mining power, then you can fudge the ledger. And so you would need more compute power than Google.
So it's an important point here. So thanks for bringing this up. So we've had a few concepts out here. Let's clarify some of them from going in. So over to Lily. Lily, you're a senior executive at this company, Earn.com, building uses for this. Could you explain to us maybe what Bitcoin, what mining is, how it's relevant to this, and are there any analogies that you think about to help us better understand what this technology is to make it real for all of us?
Certainly. So mining in the original blockchain, which is the Bitcoin blockchain, is where you basically have these supercomputers, which really anyone in the world could start up, right? So in that sense, it's permissionless and distributed, as long as you have the resources for that. And with that, you're basically always in a race with all of the other computers in the race to find the right answer, right? And there's various protections of the protocol to sort of keep the speed of discovering new blocks at a certain pace in order to sort of keep the system intact. But what that basically does is it allows anyone to join, but inserts a sort of natural barrier to entry in the cost of actually, buying, dialing up, and maintaining that computer, or in reality, sort of entire data center, right? So that's what people in Bitcoin call proof of work, and that's putting some skin in the game, and therefore being one of the folks that's verifying a node on the network. Now that's Bitcoin. And some sort of CPU or GPU-based proof of work is still how sort of the really scale blockchains are working. But increasingly, folks are going to other sort of consensus mechanisms. And so Ethereum, for example, which is the second largest blockchain, is talking about going to proof of stake, which rely on the history of someone's ownership and the size of their stake rather than just being able to buy and run a really big data center. So increasingly, there are new ways to sort of validate transactions, validate nodes, and also sort of bring consensus to one of these blockchain networks. And it's an area of quite a bit of innovation.
Great. Or is one thing, as we think about what this is some people have analyzed the blockchain to either a programming language, sort of a basic thing that can have these elements of trust, use a lot of other purposes. Others, something like a Google Doc that many people can edit. No one can take things away from, so you know what's actually on the document and don't have any third-party verification to make sure we know what is in the shared document with all of us around the world is what we say it is.
Yeah.
Lily, you had said a few interesting things about Ethereum. Ethereum is one of the other uses of the blockchain. Some have analogized it to just a way to have smart contracts to execute agreements between two people without some third party verifying it. As you think about from the perspective of an entrepreneur working on this, what are some of the most exciting areas of the blockchain that you're thinking about every day?
So I know that we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but I actually find the amount of innovation in sort of new coins that are coming out to solve different types of use cases, I actually find to be incredibly exciting. I think that...
Can you walk us through a little... Earlier we talked about how you can give tokens away and it can be used for freelance work and stuff. Can you explain a little about what that is?
Sure. So I'm of course happy to talk about what we're doing. But what I find is that from the beginning of the year, people thought it was really just a Bitcoin-only world, right? At the beginning of the year, sort of January, the market share of Bitcoin was over 95%. And that's fallen pretty dramatically to now I think it's certainly less than 50%, perhaps even substantially smaller than that, with the proliferation of all of these new coins, right? And I think one of the reasons is because people very quickly understood that Bitcoin is really just the application of blockchain to payments, which is incredibly useful, one of the most useful use cases, but there's all of these other sort of features and use cases that people do want to put on a blockchain, and maybe rather than making that an extension of Bitcoin through a sidechain or through a Lightning Network or something like that, you can actually dial up an entirely new blockchain, and that's something that Ethereum as a platform has basically enabled by allowing other people to basically very easily create a coin on top of Ethereum. And so for example, before this whole sort of ICO wave that came along this year, actually is almost exactly 1 year ago that Zcash sort of came out with their coin, which has a lot of the same fundamentals as Bitcoin. Some people would say it's a fork of Bitcoin, but critically with ZK Snarks, which is a technology that allows privacy in terms of who's sending the coin, who's receiving the coin, right? So that comes back to this idea of a blockchain is really a way of taking sort of a trusted third party out of the role as being sort of the prime mediating network for trust, right? If you can do that with payments, and you can do that in all sorts of different networks, and if you sort of extend that concept further, what it really does is in the internet world, it brings privacy and property rights to a digital world, which is increasingly where we have valuable assets, valuable information, and frankly, all of that has just sort of been moved from being custodied by one set of centralized actors to another set of centralized actors, which are like Facebook and Google and some of the larger tech companies, right? So music has gone from being distributed by the studios to now it's largely being distributed by streaming platforms, and that shift has happened in so many aspects of our lives. And even in terms of service, it'll say that you own your data. Practically speaking, you don't truly have full ownership and full control over that data. And blockchain is basically an innovation that allows you to sort of to have an alternative to that.
So that's a great way to put it. I mean, I think if you can bring parties together so they can trust each other without the need of a third party, that becomes very powerful. And as you said, one element is payments and Bitcoin, but that platform has a lot of other things that you can do. As we talk about some of those opportunities for what the blockchain platform can do, Hugh Gordon, I wanted to move to you. You've had a career at the intersection of technology, innovation, and healthcare. And as the co-founder of the USC Digital Health Lab and Akita Labs, you work on innovation in healthcare. So what are some of the opportunities in a concrete way that you see from the blockchain that might be of interest and relevant to this group?
Sure. So our organization, we help break down data silos inside of like hospitals, health systems, governments, and help folks use the data that's kind of illiquid because it's has privacy concerns, there's regulation concerns, or whatever. And so we help people use that data and kind of unlock the value that's trapped. And so blockchain's really exciting for us because of what everybody's been saying. It lets you kind of bake in privacy and bake in rule sets to how you're going to transact data. So instead of relying on like a third-party auditor for ensuring something like HIPAA compliance or whatever, you can bake the HIPAA compliance rules right into the way that you're going to handle your health data, for instance.
So what's an example of how? So speaking as I'm going into USC's hospital, I'm concerned about my data being hacked, about very personal information. How could the blockchain help solve that problem? Is that what you're talking about?
Sure, absolutely. I mean, it's definitely one future use case that's really exciting. So something we talk about a lot is having a personal health record. And so instead of your health record being stored at every doctor's office you've visited, kind of hodgepodge, and they own the data, and you have to, it's hard for you to get at it. You could have a health record that you control, and you walk into the hospital and you authorize them. You say, hey, just for this hospital visit, just for this kind of situation, you can access my data. But after I leave, it's done. And if I want to take it away during the visit, let's say I want to leave, you don't have the power over it. I do. So you can construct things like that with blockchain.
So it's a power of, so it gives patients or more control, more trust. And if one of the issues that all of us are thinking about are, I would love to have electronic health records, but how do I know it's not going to end up on the web in some way? How do I know that an old doctor doesn't have access to this? What you're telling us is because of the nature of this technology, we have that security and sort of efficiency that you really wouldn't have.
100%.
Senator Hertzberg, you in your earlier comment had got at some of the things we think about blockchain from a policymaker perspective. So you're an elected senior official of People of Los Angeles. What are some of the problems that you think about as a legislature and senior policymaker that you think the blockchain technologies we've talked about could help solve or help better address?
It's funny. I mean, you talk to everybody. You guys know about blockchain. Most people in my world think it's the chain link fence around a school or something like that. I don't know, but it's because I ask so many people, they just don't know. And what I'm trying to do is to figure out from a policy perspective how these ideas can solve the underlying architecture of what's going on in government. What's happening is, on the one hand, in government, you've got the old rules. Politics is politics. Human nature is human nature. You can say what you want. We were talking earlier, this universal basic income thing they're talking about in Silicon Valley is dumber than a box of rocks. People want to work. They want the dignity of work. It's none of those intellectual crap ideas that sounds good. But the reality is, if you don't have a society where folks are doing something of value, it destroys the human spirit, which is essential. So in that context, what's happened with the internet? The internet scares the bejeebies out of people. On the one hand, it's this fabulous tool that everybody wants the benefit of, whether you go there on Waze or all the various other things and order stuff online and look up stuff instantaneously. But on the flip side, as Matt was saying, we've got this whole security issue. Look here at UCLA, the medical records here at UCLA that got taken, or Equifax, or this or that. So it's this extraordinary interconnectedness, but there's this fear. What caused my attention as a policymaker is the notion of how do you solve the public policy problem and get the benefit out of the internet. And this is an overlay, it's a system, if you will, that does that. Why? The whole issue of it not really being hackable and people having confidence. I remember as a kid, man, people were scared to put their voice on those tape recorder things. They want to leave their voice, or to go to an ATM. We're moving fast, but the reality is we're also facing this extraordinarily huge wall. And in the context of public policy, a couple of examples of things that you can do that are real problems. Seniors. You saw this during the crisis, the mortgage crisis. You know how many people whose homes they found a lien against and they're foreclosed on because somebody went and recorded a document that they got a forged notary on, and they recorded a lien against somebody's house, and people, oh my God, what do I do? And they go to legal services, and they're having spilkas for the Yiddish cops in the room. And so the bottom line is, here's a way where you can create a chain of title that protects people on the land transfers. You get your driver's license, a title to your car. So many practical things that you can do that government can interface with. Now, the challenge of getting there is different, but to me, the issues are trust/hack proof. And the second part, to which we'll talk about, is the micropayments. This notion of a third party. What's really going on in the system is we talk about the democratization of the world because of the internet, and that's partially true. But we've just transferred the power, as we were talking earlier, from the Hearst family and a few other families who sold advertising in one medium to some other families, the Zuckerbergs and the Larry Page and Sergey Brin families. And so the thing that you do here through this is the ability where people can get A, they control their own destiny, and B, if there's advertisements, they can get a piece of the revenue. So this whole micropayment, please.
So that's
solves
a great
huge problems for
Right.
politics.
So on this micropayment point, I mean, you've brought out a number of things, Senator Hertzberg, I think is interesting. I mean, first, if you're looking for efficiency plus security, if we think about land titling, that your house and your deed is what you say you are, private information like your driver's license, and then the other piece that you talked about, which is particularly interesting, is using these tokens or these types of things on the blockchains to pay you and allow people to share in the wealth of an internet, which might not have been possible before. I think, Lily, that's something I know that you've talked about a little bit with, that I know your company is working on with what it might do for freelance working of it. Could you talk a little bit about that particular opportunity as it relates to what the blockchain can do for paying people and economic opportunity, and something we care a lot about is job creation, basically?
Yes, certainly. And so we recently rebranded as earn.com. That's, earn as in earn money, not your grandmother's ashes. And so,
Okay.
So earn.com, and essentially micropayments for microtasks. So right now, Bitcoin Base will be swapping to our own token, but essentially what we allow you to do is to monetize a single email, right? To monetize, a number of you probably get in-mail messages that are more of a nuisance than anything. And what if you could actually monetize all of that? Because one way to think about it is an email is a microtask, right? So a microtask we all do probably 100 times a day. That's what micro work looks for us. Micro work for people in other frames of life.
So walk us through how this works. So spam is the bane of all of our existence as we think about it.
Right.
So how do you can you just walk us through in more detail? How does it work to leverage the technology to make sure that emails are read or used in a more effective way?
So we just came up with something very simple, which is that if I'd never met Matt before, I really want to reach out to him to get his perspective on policy and technology. I could either get a warm intro, but that costs political capital for our interlocutor, right? Cold email him or LinkedIn email him, none of which work, right? So instead, what if I could just send him, add value on the first interaction and offer him, let's say $20 to reply to my message. And he only gets it if he replies within a certain period of time. So it sounds like a very foreign concept, right? Because it seems very impersonal, all those sorts of things. But it actually works. And what you can then do is, on InMail, they actively discourage you from messaging 1,000 people because that's what they would consider abuse on the platform, right? Because you're abusing people's time. Well, not really if I'm actually offering them $10. Then I'm getting something out of it. Otherwise, I never would have initiated that transaction. They're getting something out of it on the first go. And so it's actually working. And so we get cold email reply rates of about 60% in the first 24 hours because the transaction is clearing, right? So that's what it looks like for us, where our micro work is selling a minute of our time over email, typically. But in many other markets, which is the majority of the people in the world, I think there's 4 billion people with phones out there and internet connection of some sort. For them, micro work looks very different. It could be something like labeling an image. It could be something like cleaning data at the very sort of one end of the spectrum, to everything in between to designing a logo. And we already have a huge proliferation of freelancing platforms out there, but they're all sort of for still large pieces of micro work for hours at a time rather than minutes at a time. And so if I think about that sort of much more broadly, then what it basically means is that when you still the largest force for migration in the world is economic migration, right? And that's because most of the jobs and the opportunities are really not where you live. And if you live in a place like Senegal, that's a really big problem because you've got millions of people who'd rather risk their lives going to Italy than to stay at home and try to make life work there because it's just not possible. So what if instead you could have not necessarily 40 hours a week of work, but at least have some economic activity go to where the people are rather than the other way around? That seems to me like something that there would be a massive market for.
And that's powerful. And what the technology gets at the center, Lily, of what you said is it's not efficient to pay someone a few cents on the dollar to do any number of tasks because the transaction costs and fees would overwhelm the actual payment you get. But if what blockchain allows you to do is break down the amount that you can pay and make that cheaper and reduce the transaction costs, you suddenly open those new types of freelance work. And what you said, it's borderless too.
It is borderless, and it's one of those things where right now it seems sort of non-obvious to us because in our world money works pretty well, and we never really have a use case for paying 1,000 people $1 at a time. But actually, a lot of transactions around the world, there is a use case for that, and it's impossible to do with fiat money, right? If I want to hire someone, if I want to pay 100 people in India to do a $5 task, it's impossible, right? But you can really only do that with digital currency and do that instantly and programmatically, and sort of opening up those sort of payments use cases actually enables a whole lot of other ways of transacting and building economy around.
I just want you to know that if they want to import the services into California, I want to tax it.
But no, that's like joking aside. The center hurts, but that's what I want to get to after this because the view of regulators, how you think about that, frictionless can mean different things. But Lily, what you said is, in addition to looking abroad, as we look at what's happening in California, there's a huge amount of remittances, which are paid from diaspora and other communities into here. And if you can reduce the amount that's charged as a fee when you come in, that's more money coming in here. This leads me to another thing, Brian, I want to turn to you is you have a unique vantage point. You lived in Nicaragua for 7 years. You were a successful entrepreneur working outside the United States. A lot of times what we hear about the blockchain technology, a little what Lily said, is really interesting things that can be used in emerging markets and developing countries which are less integrated with the financial system. Could you talk with us about what are some of those examples of cool things the blockchain has done for good in those places, and maybe how they might also be of use in a place like California and Southern California, where you're a native of here?
Sure. Let me just kind of ask another question. Just kind of your thumbs like this right now. Just up, sideways. Yeah. Thumb up if you trust and believe that your government's transparent, or thumbs down if you believe that it's not. So most people's thumbs are down.
I know the belly of the beast. I know the truth. Believe me, it's this direction.
He has insider information, which is troubling.
So even our state senator had a thumbs down, and I'm sure some people here are from the U.S. and other people are from abroad, and so I'm sure this kind of represents actually more governments, just your state, local, or federal, as other governments as well, and that's just a general concept of government. I get it. I worked in the White House. I understand people's concern about government. I think if I wonder if I asked that same question about some of our companies today. How much do we trust after the Equifax after that hack? How much do we trust Volkswagen after they use software to get around the Clean Air Act and not only defrauded consumers but defrauded our environment? A lot of the accusations that are happening across the tech sector as well, Facebook, fake news, et cetera.
So, Brian, how does blockchain help that? So, for these trust issues, which are significant with government across large companies, so how does blockchain change that or create new opportunities?
So, when we're talking about government, what a lot of us rely on, or the interaction that you have, is this old school protocol called the rubber stamp authentication protocol. right? Where you just like go in, you're like, did I get my paper stamped, and did I take it to that other person, and how hard is that to forge today? And so is there an opportunity to reestablish trust and transparency regardless of the government that was in power or that will be in power in the future, so that I know that my title will be tied to the security of a public blockchain, or I know that my identity or that my car title or that any other asset will be tied to that, not to potentially the corruption of a government or what can be changed in the back room with this rubber stamp that says, oh, no, you weren't there. And so in a way, it can offer a form of a digital notarization service that regardless of the government in power, that you can trust. And additionally, many of us don't enjoy our interactions with the government. And so especially as when it relates to transactions. And so what if there's an opportunity where you can actually make transactions happen more seamlessly and easily that still have the digital notarization or the official digital stamp of a government, while not having to interface with them because it can be done from one phone to another, whether it's selling your car, selling your house, or verifying your identity. That becomes incredibly powerful.
Interesting. And are there examples that you've seen this work in practice? Their government has implemented them and done it in a way that makes sense and works?
So there are governments that are doing this in beta right now with land titling. Country of Georgia is testing this out. Sweden is testing this out. I wrote the White House memo on Bitcoin back in the Obama administration and was encouraging them to start a research lab on blockchain. And there's actually one today. So to Trump's credit, they're actually creating a blockchain research group across the federal government to communicate about ways they can do that. I'd encourage it to happen at the state of California's government.
So in some sense, Brian, you hit an important point. It's actually a rare bipartisan or nonpartisan issue. In sense, uses of cryptocurrency isn't a Democrat or Republican issue. It's an efficiency, effectiveness, doing something better for us all.
Can I
issue.
object to that conclusion?
Good. Well, no. Let me know. So Bob. So I guess, am I wrong? And the question that I would ask you is, as a legislature here, Brian and Lily and Hugh have talked about some of these interesting cases. What's the likelihood the state of California could adopt any of these?
Efficiency means that I lose my job. Okay? It's not just everybody, it's not just government employees, all employees. There's a fear of what's going on with robotics and AI and machine learning that captures people. I think a lot of what's going on across the country in terms of the fear that you see has been people's concerned about the future of work. And this kind of stuff gives people the bejeebies. And, I think the intersection here, efficiency is a word we never use. It's about trust. I'm a Democrat, if you didn't know. And to me, the most important thing is to have people have trust in government. When people trust and have confidence in government, they'll have a more activist government. When they think government's horrible, they won't support the kinds of things that I think government needs to do to deliver for people. So as a consequence, I look at this, I think we've got to be on the cutting edge, and I think this is about trust and not displacing a bunch of people, but maybe the rubber stamp people will change and be technology people or the people that make the rubber stamps, like the people who used to make horseshoes. But the trust piece and the democratization of capital. You've got larger dynamic issues that are going on here, and when you think about problem solving, the challenge I always find is we always do it within a narrow bandwidth and think about it in that concept. I'm thinking about the future of work, about capital. What's happening is economies go like this. If you read Pickney, what that guy's name is, and capital goes like this. If you harmonize capital with work, you avoid the problem of what we're seeing now in the disparate society. And the idea of creating the micro payments like you're talking about, new ways for people to make money. If someone's advertising to you, you get a piece of it. Right now, when I order online and I charge on Visa, right, I'm not paying the person in the book company to buy the blockchain revolution that I bought online. I'm paying a third-party intermediary that's making 2.5 points, and they then handle that transaction. A blockchain allows the direct-to-direct, and all of a sudden the amount of money you pay for a third party of the keeper of the ledger becomes smaller, and there's a revenue stream that you can redistribute to people. So if people want to advertise to my community, I can make a few bucks, or whatever the case may be. But I'm trying to multitask the diagnostic here and understand the human condition, understand the larger economic circumstances, and how do you take something like this and instead of ignoring it by being in government, being on the cutting edge, and maybe I will introduce a blockchain legislation.
You should.
Illinois has it for 5 different pilot projects. Delaware's doing it for stock certificates, so you can do your stock certificate on blockchains. The federal government's doing it. The GSA has this, as you were suggesting, the U.S. Federal Blockchain Forum that they're doing. China, Foshan, the city has, like Estonia is doing the same thing. There's a lot of stuff happening, and I don't want to be left in the dust.
So it's good. You heard it here first. There's a new California blockchain.
There we go. Thanks, Schwartz.
This is more than you get out of a normal panel. So I'm going to open it up to a few questions, but really I think, Bob, what you said is something profound. As we talk about efficiency, but you're talking about opportunity, about changing how we talk about these conversations, and about how regulation might go. Before I turn to the audience, there's another part of the blockchain that is getting a lot of news, which are initial coin offerings. How many of you have heard of this? Raise your hand if you've participated in an ICO. Wow. So a lot smaller amount, but still larger than what you might expect. So, this is an example of an incentive network that can help with fundraising, that you have some companies that are raising $200 million in a matter of days. Bob, I don't know if this is something that's either been on your radar at all, about if there's a decentralized way to raise capital through these types of things, and that creates some regulatory concerns. But before that, for Lily or Brian, could you just tell us what ICOs are and why it matters, and if there are opportunities created for this type of area of the blockchain as well?
Sure. An initial coin offering, as Lily mentioned earlier, many of them are being built off of the Ethereum network, and what that allows for is a company to essentially sell not equity in their company, but the utility of their business model. In theory, that token, if the utility of that business model increases in value, then the value of that token will increase in value. And so one example would be Filecoin. Filecoin is a company who has issued tokens, and what they want to do is take your remnant storage on your laptop and be able to monetize it by almost kind of trying to compete against Amazon Web Services. And so you would buy these tokens to be able to buy or sell storage. And in doing that in a distributed way, if the value of that storage, if people continue to want to use that, it increases the value of that token. Now, you may say, well, why is that important? Well, because it increases the ability for interoperability. I'll give you an example. Many of you may have stored your photos on Flickr, for example. And then you didn't like Flickr because it got acquired by Yahoo or got acquired by Verizon, and you weren't happy with them, and so you switched over to Google Photos. So then you've got to go through this process where you got to download all of these files from Flickr, and then you got to re-upload them, and you lose the data the way that you tag those photos, and you got to re-upload them to Google Photos, and geez, who wants to do that? But with Filecoin, developers can build off of Filecoin. You can literally flip a switch, and it could just move from Flickr to Google, and then you're not using them for storage per se. You're just using them for a better interface because you like how Google uses artificial intelligence to better tag your files. And so it doesn't force you to stay with one company versus another, and it dramatically reduces the switching cost, which creates more competition and more innovation. So that's the value of something like a Filecoin to consumers. But if that starts to take off and becomes a great idea, and you're one who bought the tokens on for pennies, and then all of a sudden the value of that increases dramatically because it has wider adoption, then all of a sudden your initial investment in that business model actually increases. So it's it's a very interesting, I think, going to be a very important concept. I think a lot of the ICOs are actually going to struggle a lot too, And so very buyer beware. But we will see a lot of innovation come out of it that I think will dramatically transform and improve the internet and the level of competition, because we kind of went from an open, decentralized internet to a lot of closed gardens, and this is going to reopen it again and be a really important innovation.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned it's opening, it's opportunity, and it's allowing you to, in a sense, own more of your own data in a way that is more empowering and less of the problems or the opportunities that Senator Hertzberg was talking about. I'm going to open up for a few questions, just given the mic. I'll take a question, go back, and then we'll continue the conversation.
Okay. So advertising is a $400 billion business in the United States. It powers information, which then powers thinking and policy. So could each of you briefly touch on the most important impact blockchain will have on advertising spending?
So the question is, we'll think probably good at whoever wants to take it, is what's the impact of the blockchain on advertising spending? What it will be, in particular, given that advertising on the internet is so significant. And one other piece of that is, it's what Mark Andreessen has said, for example, that banner ads were the original sin of the internet. If there are things that we're really troubled about, are there other things that blockchain can do? Does anyone want to take a stab at that question? Lily?
Go ahead, sir.
I see advertising on the internet as really just a form of micropayment.
Yeah.
Right? So you're getting all this free content. How else are you going to pay for it? Well, it's just really advertising right now. And one of those reasons is because with one perspective is because the current payment systems would never allow you to instantly pay 1 cent over and over and over again in order to access some API, right? And that's roughly sort of the cost of an API, but there's no way you can pay that with a credit card. Or settle that instantly. And so as a result, the only way you can do that is to place ads and then hope that someone will get distracted, get a 0.5% click-through rate on a good day, and then sort of get people to your funnel that way, right? So if you think about that and all the friction that's involved, production of ads, placement of ads, trying to bait people to click through, it's actually highly inefficient. And you could even argue that $400 billion is a massive under-monetization of the internet. And so what you enable when you have digital currency and can actually facilitate true micropayments is you can have new business models where you can pay to read an article, right? Because you get away from the sort of economic necessity to monetize at sort of like a $10 a month type of threshold before you can sort of directly interact with the consumer. So that's...
Yeah, I really think it's going to be a just extraordinary boon for advertisers. Because, yeah, I mean, you go out and you buy an ad in the New York Times, you're kind of guessing who's going to see it. Then you go out and then you've got AT&T people that are looking at phone numbers, who called, whatever, you're guessing. Credit card companies are better because you know you bought something at Nordstrom's or whatever it might be. It's an even better deal. But this is something where, I mean, when you really get into science, and you probably know this better than I do, and I've talked to a lot of people about this, it's all, especially now, as impersonal as life has become, the genius of sales is personal. Knowing what people want, what they care about, what they're interested in, anticipating all that type of stuff. There's just beginning to get a movement of that. And if you have a blockchain where you can actually create micropayments and people are actually getting a benefit, and that direct customer relationship, know your customer, the single biggest thing, it's going to be a gigantic boon for the whole business, and much more effective, because at the end of the day, it's going to produce more sales. It'll produce more stuff online, I think, which is going to hurt retail people, but I do think it'll be a big deal.
I think we have a lot of questions. Sir, I'll take you in the back.
Thank you. I'm one of those people that's in the 50% that didn't or don't know the blockchain and haven't used it. So in the example you gave about microcurrencies and synagogues, et cetera, very naive question, sorry, but does that $5 or $100 that sit in the blockchain format, how does that become fungible? I mean, is it real money? Do I just go to...
Yep.
That's a great question.
Very good. Yeah, very good question.
Not a dumb question.
Yeah.
That's a great question. So the question is when we talk about the store of value in the blockchain, is it real money? How do we know it's really worth something? And how do you translate it into money in the quote-unquote real world?
I mean, if you want to go to a Sacramento Kings game, you can buy the ticket. You can go to the concession stand, buy in Bitcoin. If you want to buy something from Microsoft, they accept Bitcoin. You want to buy a Tesla, you can buy that in Bitcoin. So, there's hundreds of thousands of vendors that are starting to accept Bitcoin. Is it as readily accessible as the credit card network? Absolutely not.
But I'm sorry, but that's a different answer.
Yeah.
So
It's very similar to a currency.
Party has accepted, so it's really a Bitcoin.
So it's more than that, right? So that's a great question, but it's not only, as Brian said, a lot of merchants take Bitcoin, but also you can go to a platform like Coinbase, which is a Bitcoin wallet where your Bitcoin stay, and you can translate immediately into US dollars or other type of currencies, and then take your US dollars to buy things in the same way that anyone takes any cash.
But why can't you use, why are we stuck in this Bitcoin world? Who cares? Why can't you just USD? So if I've got an account, like a PayPal account, and I put the money in for you to read something or for you to do some work, it transfers through normal, customary means. We don't have to, I don't think we have to go that far. Blockchain is not, is just a ledger system. You could put anything in it you want. No, am I wrong about that?
I'll give you one example. So one other thing that I'm doing is I'm running for United States Congress right now, and I accept Bitcoin.
Has anybody given you money in Bitcoin?
20% of my donations have come in Bitcoin.
Oh, man, that's funny.
Where's it coming from?
And so,
Oh, man.
well, we track it just like we track credit cards. And so, but here's the key difference, is that my transaction fee. So I think if someone was to max out $5,400, I pay a $5 transaction fee for Bitcoin. What would I pay if that was a credit card? $130 or something?
Yeah.
So I save $125. So there's a lot of different advantages. Look, there's disadvantages to using Bitcoin, let's be clear. But there are also a lot of advantages. And what you have to look at is, what am I trying to accomplish? And does what I'm trying to accomplish benefit me using a credit card or using Bitcoin or accepting cash? There are three different things that have three different benefits and disadvantages. And you just have to be clear on what you're trying to accomplish. For me, I want to lower my fees. So,
And raise more money.
yeah.
We'll go on. I think there are a few other.
How do you use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange if the price is not stable?
So the question is for those is, it's how to use Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. But I guess the broader question is, how do we think about the fluctuating value of Bitcoin, at least one of the currencies, both for Mule and also as a regulator, I guess, Bob, how do you think about the nature of both that and maybe some of the ICOs is what some of the concerns voters and consumers may have? You guys want to talk about some of the fluctuation of Bitcoin?
So Bitcoin's value fluctuates all the time. Lately, or this year, it's gone up.
A lot.
That's why you take
And you just establish a price of whatever you're selling, and then you accept the Bitcoin at that moment, at that time. You'll have providers like BitPay or Coinbase, which are kind of like credit card processors, but for Bitcoin. And they'll basically accept the Bitcoin, and they can immediately deposit it into your US dollar account at the moment of transaction. And so the volatility doesn't even impact you. Or you can hold it, and it may go up or it may go down. But you don't have to get into the business of hedging or figuring out where you want to play in the Bitcoin game. You can you have providers now that'll just accept it at the moment of transaction for the value that you stipulated, and it'll go straight into your US
Can I just
dollars.
add one other thing with respect to what you asked about Senegal, sir? You there? 40 to 60% of the transactions today are M-Pesa in Kenya, right? Basically, and in Afghanistan, to avoid the problem of all the generals and the colonels stealing all the cash so that the soldiers weren't getting paid, they used M-Pesa, which is an electronic on-your-phone payment system. It's happening more in India. And it's unbelievable technology where literally, so if I was in Senegal and you were hiring me from Hollywood and I needed to make an extra $10, you could transfer it through M-Pesa, and then I could use that to go buy milk or go put minutes on my phone or whatever else it may be. There's a number of technologies already available to allow for those transactions outside of the whole issue of the blockchain. The blockchain creates this whole opportunity, the advertising world, or the ability to, what I'm particularly concerned about is this distribution of wealth. How can you create the confidence and avoid everybody, a small group of people controlling all the world's assets? We've got to democratize the money. That's a big piece of the deal.
I think we'll move to that. I'll tell over to you, ma'am, over to you.
This is about social impact of blockchain, so I want to kind of get back to that.
Yeah.
How do you stop? How do you stop this industry, I guess you might call it, from becoming another tech white dude industry and leaving out women and people of color and
Who wants to take a stab at that?
Well, at MIT, when I was running the research group there, we made concerted efforts to do that. At every big Bitcoin event, we wouldn't speak at that conference unless they gave us at least 20 free tickets. And these tickets usually cost $1,000 a pop for us to get women and people of color to be able to go for free. And we would have these scholarships. We hosted an entire boot camp for an entire week that was funded, that flew kids out, even kids from UCLA, out to MIT who were minorities, women, to be able to go and learn. And actually 21 helped sponsor it and gave every kid a mining device to learn how to program. So at MIT, we spent a lot of time and a lot of effort to make sure that the pipeline of college students represented the diversity that we have in the US, so that when this important technology will proliferate, that we have sowed the seeds of having kids that are more diverse into the ecosystem so they're inspired. But that is something that is incredibly important that I would encourage all companies to do and all universities who are starting research groups to do
Can
that
I
as
just
well.
add one more dimension to that? We got this at Dialogue, and I interviewed for the book that I'm working on this stuff. There's a fellow from China who went to Baltimore, and he's really interested in this issue of social bias. That when you go to Silicon Valley, it's all the Stanford Business School people or the MIT people, this culture, and you're validated by virtue of your background and who you know and the club you're in. And what he did, which was really brilliant, is he put together a 3-hour test where he said, if you pass this test, I'll give you a job for 2 years. I'll train you for 6 months, I'll give you a job for 2 years. A third of the people who pass this test, because he's testing people's thinking process of writing in algorithms and writing code. A third are women, third African American, FedEx drivers, UPS drivers, people that work in fast food chains, people that normally wouldn't find themselves in those social circles, but he tested their skill and how they think and found out that so many of them actually were better and outperformed some of the brainiacs who live in that social world. So, and there's a couple other people doing this stuff around the country that are bringing these people into that world to test their skill rather than their social biases.
So
It's been pretty cool.
Lily and Hugh, is there anything you wanted to add?
I would also argue just that the whole technology is
No disrespect to
about
MIT and Stanford, guys.
democratization. Oh, did I cut you off? I'm sorry.
No, all you.
Yeah, it's just about democratization, and it's about spreading out the responsibility for everything across all of society, right? And so when you exchange Bitcoin, you don't even know who you don't even necessarily know who you're exchanging it with. So it's a lot harder to make like a profile someone or to make a decision based on factors that aren't relevant to your transaction. And if you put information in there, again, it's a lot harder to include things that shouldn't be included in your decision-making process.
I think this fellow.
Okay. Well, I appreciate. I'm getting the signal that we're running out of time.
Really quick though, this is important because no one's asked this. It seems like it's the elephant in the room. I was reading that book 2 years ago on the counter there, and I stopped. I got to the chapter on Ethereum, and that week it got hacked for 30 million. Just 48 hours ago, $300 million was lost in Ethereum. So my question is, how do we know that this really is hack-proof, and how do you utilize such a system when there's such, as we speak, massive risk to it?
Who wants to take a stab at the security of the blockchain and Ethereum and hacking?
That is a risk with that at least people in the crypto world have recognized for a while is just there's a much wider attack surface for Ethereum. So one of the reasons why people are coming into crypto now really like Bitcoin is because they see Bitcoin as being safe, right? A few years ago, I don't think I would have thought anyone on Wall Street would tell me that they thought Bitcoin was a safe alternative. But now, and part of that just technically the way it's constructed, sort of the scripting language in Bitcoin is by design dead simple, right? It's basically what like calculators used 40 years ago. So that, if you're dealing with something as sensitive as payments and you can't really mess that up, that it just is, custom built for that one use case. With Ethereum, because they have this much broader, desire to be, world's supercomputer and those sorts of things, it is absolutely a risk.
So there's one question as we wrap up with this and it gets really what you said about some of this interaction between security and innovation. So we've talked a lot about the opportunities for what the blockchain can do for government. And the last question as we wrap up, I want to reverse the direction and then ask, what can government do to create a more effective and supportive environment for the types of innovations that the blockchain can create for social purposes?
Create regulatory sandboxes that allow for experimentation while also protecting the rights and the safety of consumers, so that startups can figure out how to test medical records or test financial transactions in a new, innovative way without going to such a scale that can have a wide-scale impact. Other governments are doing this. We haven't seen the United States, the federal, state, or local do that I've seen. And so I think that's going to be incredibly important to allow for that innovation. And we're going to enter a world where we have, technological regulatory arbitrage. We already see it with autonomous vehicles. The second that the state DMV here in California told Uber to get off their streets with autonomous vehicles, the governor of Arizona stood up and said, well, if you're not welcome in the state of California, you're welcome on the streets of Arizona. And so I think the 21st century tax credit that was used by elected officials is actually going to have nothing to do with taxes and have everything to do with smart regulations around all of these disruptive technologies, be it blockchain, autonomous vehicles, drones, artificial intelligence, CRISPR. There's probably like 10 or 15 that are coming out. And that's going to be incredibly important to have, less than 4% of people in Congress have a technical background. No wonder why we can't come up with regulations that make sense, that allow for innovation, and that prevent things like these hacks that are happening. Because we're confronting all these challenges and we don't have people do it. So we need to upgrade our Congress and upgrade our elected officials.
As we wrap up, anyone else want Lily, do you want anything?
I would support that. Just one of the problems when it comes to blockchain is by definition sort of borderless, right? And so while it would be very helpful to have that, I think that works really, really well for a number of technical innovations, especially when it comes to medicine, which is probably the most critical area of innovation we all have to be aware of. But that would be amazing, right? And when to this lady's point earlier about diversity and inclusion, if communities wanted to create that regulatory sandbox and sort of bring in, from a fintech regulation or something like that, I know a lot of people would be very interested in that.
Hugh, and then Senator Hertzberg.
Sure. I think that to be a concrete example, for instance, like ICOs, the legality is questionable. So offering just guidance and kind of like guidelines for innovators, I think is one thing that governments can do. I think we're working with the FDA on a federal project to incorporate blockchain. And I would like to see more of that, just more innovation in government and more kind of risk taking, so that it's not the small tiny company that has to take the fall. The government can take part of the risk there.
Great, Senator Hertzberg.
Yeah, the belly of the beast of this stuff, is where the rubber meets the road, is so hard because government thinks so differently. If anybody's been involved in procurement, you find out that by the time Phil Rex back there, he challenges all the procurement deals. After somebody wins, then the people sue. By the time you figure out that what the project is, what the stuff is at the end, the technology's gone, or it blows up and everybody gets pissed off. I was talking to a woman who was one task force of 7 who solved the whole problem with Obamacare when the internet went down. They think differently and they work in these clusters. What do you call it? There's a certain group for that that's called. They work in these clusters. And so we have to restructure both an inside-outside play. And it's hard because we're fearful in government that somebody's going to come in and be efficient and take away our jobs. But it really is the underlying building block, the DNA, if you will, of how we operate versus how the technology war operates. And that's the challenge we face. And that's what I'll probably put in my bill, so I need some ideas.
Excellent. Well, look, a lot has come out of this.
I just sent a note to my chief of staff, said we're doing this.
Excellent. So as we wrap, I want to thank both our panelists. And we've had a lot to chew on exactly what the blockchain is, not what this technology is, that it's here to stay, that there are a fair amount of opportunities in some concrete ways, from DMV to land titling to notarization to healthcare records. But they're also the very beginning of concerns that we should be getting at and thinking about having better cooperation between what this technology is, what government's doing. We have one Senate bill already coming out of this, and I want to thank everyone for their time and thoughtfulness in doing it today. Thanks very much.
I need your support. We got to pass this, baby.